If motivation were just about wanting something badly enough, then why does it disappear so quickly? Why do you sometimes feel driven, focused, almost pulled toward a goal, and then a few days later, that same goal feels heavy, distant, or strangely flat? Why can a new project feel exciting at first, while an old one feels harder and harder to care about? Why does progress energize us, but success sometimes drains the very feeling we were chasing? There is a pattern here, and once you see it, motivation stops looking random. Most people think motivation rises when something feels rewarding, and falls when they become lazy, distracted, or undisciplined. That sounds simple, but it leaves out the actual system, because motivation is not just about reward. It is about prediction. It is about whether your brain believes something is worth pursuing right now. For a long time, dopamine was described as the brain's feel-good chemical, and there is a reason that idea became popular. Dopamine is involved in reward. It matters for reinforcement. It matters for desire. But the modern picture is more precise. Dopamine is less about simple pleasure, and more about wanting, pursuit, and learning what matters. That matters because if dopamine were just pleasure, motivation would be easy to explain. You would feel good when you got the reward, and that would be the end of the story. But that is not what researchers found. They found that dopamine neurons often respond strongly to the difference between what was expected and what actually happened. That difference is called reward prediction error. That sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Your brain is constantly guessing. It is asking, what is about to happen? Was that better than expected? Worse than expected? Or exactly what I thought? If the outcome is better than expected, the signal goes up. If it is worse than expected, the signal goes down. If it is exactly what was expected, there may be little or no update at all. This is one of the deepest reasons motivation rises and falls, because motivation is not only responding to reward, it is responding to change in expected value. In other words, your brain is not just asking, is this good? It is asking, is this better than I thought? Worse than I thought? Still worth my effort? Now the pattern gets more interesting. When something is new, uncertain, or just beginning to show signs of progress, motivation often rises. Why? Because the brain still has something to learn. The outcome still carries information. There is still a meaningful gap between what is known and what might happen. But when something becomes too familiar, too predictable, or too fully explained by your existing expectations, motivation can fall, not because the goal has no value, but because the brain is no longer getting much signal from it. This is why the beginning of a goal can feel electric. A new business idea, a new relationship, a new habit, a new workout plan at the start. The brain is flooded with possibility. It is not seeing the full outcome yet. It is seeing uncertainty, movement, maybe progress. That creates motivational pull. Then something changes. The work becomes repetitive. The reward becomes more predictable. The difference between expectation and reality narrows, and motivation starts to flatten. This is the part people often misread. They assume the drop means they picked the wrong goal, or that they are not disciplined enough, or that they lost the spark. Sometimes that is true, but often the more accurate explanation is simpler. The brain has updated. The novelty has declined. The signal is weaker, and now the task requires a different kind of support. This also explains something else. Why anticipation can feel stronger than possession. Why chasing can feel stronger than having. Why wanting can stay intense even when liking does not increase very much. That difference between wanting and liking is incredibly important. Wanting is about motivational pull. Liking is about pleasure or enjoyment. They often travel together, but they are not the same thing. And dopamine is much more closely tied to wanting than to liking. That means motivation can rise even when pleasure is not especially high, and motivation can fall even when the reward is still objectively valuable. Think about checking your phone. Sometimes the strongest pull is not after you open it. It is before, in the moment of anticipation, the maybe, the possible message, the unknown result. That is a motivational system responding to prediction and uncertainty. The same thing happens in studying work, habits, games, productivity systems, and even relationships. Small signs of progress can raise motivation. Unexpected wins can raise motivation. A cue that signals possible success can raise motivation. But when outcomes become too fixed and fully expected, the system often quiets down. So motivation rises when the brain senses movement toward value, and it falls when value becomes stale, certain, or disconnected from learning. Now, this does not mean you need constant novelty. That would be a mistake, because if you chase only stimulation, You may train yourself to depend on surprise instead of building stability. The real lesson is not keep everything exciting. The real lesson is that the brain needs meaningful signals. Progress helps, clear feedback helps, intermediate milestones help, visible movement helps, because those things restore informational value to effort. This is why long goals often fail in the middle. At the beginning, motivation is high because the future is open. At the end, motivation may return because the goal is close. But the middle can feel empty. Why? Because the brain is no longer getting enough contrast, not enough surprise, not enough evidence that effort is changing reality fast enough. And that is where many people quit, not because they are weak, but because the motivational signal has dropped and they do not know why. Once you understand this, motivation stops feeling like a moral issue. It becomes a systems issue. Most people assume motivation is a personality trait. Either you have it or you do not. But the more accurate model is this. Motivation is the brain's changing estimate of whether effort is worth continuing. That estimate rises with meaningful prediction, promising cues, progress, and positive surprise. And it falls with predictability, weak feedback, disappointment, and the collapse of novelty. That is the transformation in how to think about it. You are not just motivated or unmotivated. You are experiencing a signal that is going up or down based on how your brain is interpreting value, expectation, and effort. And that changes how behavior should be designed. If you want motivation to last longer, you do not just need a reward at the end. You need feedback along the way. You need visible progress. You need cues that remind the brain that the effort still matters. You need a structure that keeps updating the system, because dopamine is not simply trying to make you happy. It is helping the brain decide what to pursue, what to repeat, and what to keep investing in. And once you understand that, the next question becomes obvious. If motivation rises and falls based on prediction and reinforcement, then how do some behaviors survive that drop? How do certain actions continue even when motivation is low? How does something move from effort to consistency to automatic behavior? That is the next layer of the system, and that is where habits begin. If this video explained why motivation rises and falls, the next one should answer what happens after repetition wins, how the brain turns repeated effort into something more automatic. That is what we'll explore next.